Hey, okay, this is not an episode of Writer's Block. Me and Sam W were just going at it on Twitter. My phone was getting a bunch of notifications, and they used to just sending me these paragraphs. I couldn't read all of it. My brain's fried. I was just trying to read the words. I'm like, I'll just call him on on Skype or Discord or whatever, and we'll settle this out. So you were saying, let's start here, okay? You were saying that Kerrigan is really deserving of a major. You want to lay out your points? Do you have a quick thesis?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. Just so we get clear on what I mean. So I tweeted out saying that I want Face to win because I think that he and Kerrigan and Guardian are due. I use the word due for majors, which is, I don't know if that's a term people use, but in hockey it's a term people use for awards. So let's say a defenseman can get the Norris Trophy, which is the writers vote for who is the best defenseman that year. And sometimes there'll be a player who isn't the best defenseman of the year, but he's been one of the best defensemen over a long period of time. And he probably should have won at some point in the last decade, but he's never won. But but he's still good, but he's not the best. But you'll say, oh, he's due, so we'll vote for him because he should have at least won. And so my point was that even though Guardian and Kerrigan, obviously they shouldn't be given the major. They haven't won one, but they probably should have won one over the last 4 years. And so and they haven't. And so when I say he's due, I mean just he's earned that level of achievement, even though he hasn't earned a major specifically.
So so for example, if you're playing a dice game and you have a 25% chance to win and you play 5 rounds, somewhere that 5 you should have won. I mean, law of independent assortment, right? You're not it doesn't build up or anything. But at maybe at the 5th or the 6th or the 7th, you're due for a win, in that sort of terminology.
Yeah.
So,
yes, yeah, that's kind of.
So this is sort of your thinking with Kerrigan and Guardian, but for Kerrigan specifically, I think that I sort of caught you at a bad moment where you're just angrily replying to me. You were telling me before the show about just some hockey stuff causing some fury in your brain. But my thing was, okay, if I think about Astralis, I think about FaZe, their chances of winning a major, going back 4 or 5 majors, seems fairly decent, the 25% coin, the dice thing again, right? It seems like they have a pretty good shot every time. And maybe you think wow, Kerrigan hasn't won a major. That's really strange when you think about all the teams he's been on, all the runs he's been on. Especially this most recent major before the current major, the Face It major, going back to E-League Boston. That's definitely in FaZe's wheelhouse, right? To win that tournament. You think it's so improbable with Astralis sort of looking like shit and going out in the groups. SK now MIBR. Not having Phelps and playing with not having Bolts and then playing with Phelps, right? And then other teams like G2 was good in earlier 2017, not really showing up, and they're not really being that much competition for FaZe. You think that Cloud9, I mean, that's not Cloud9's major to win, it's obviously FaZe. But I think the differentiation I make in my mind is okay, yeah, at some point Kerrigan should have won a major, right? He's due in your sense, but not in the sense that, but the differentiation I'm making is between team and himself as a player, right? Because Guardian is a star player who carried Navi. Navi never before Simple and Flamey were always sort of weaker on the firepower end of things, and he sort of really brought that roster and was hard carrying. I don't know if I say that Kerrigan's hard carrying is the reason why these FaZe and Astralis were so good. It's not I would give him, he's the driving force on these teams. You think of these rosters that he's been on with Device, Nix, and Dupree, KHB, and then that lineup, and then the Kirby lineup that did win a major. He was on those 2 lineups. Those are really strong lineups. Now the FaZe lineup, okay, the first one with Kiyoshima and Alu, pretty good. They're a pretty good team. I mean, Nico is obviously a superstar player. He's very good. That was a pretty strong lineup. SK might, as you were saying on Twitter, might have been a stronger firepower-wise, but that was, they were really up there. But was it Kerrigan bringing that nugget of strength? What do you think about this, if I'm coming at it this way. Do you see my point?
Yeah, I understand why people are apprehensive about complimenting Kerrigan because when you look at what's going on in the game, the immediate impact is not coming from the in-game leader. It's coming from the players. And so when you have star players, you often look at it and say, oh, well, it's the star players that are creating the win. But the problem I have with that is how inconsistent. If you accept that, then how it's the way we give credit to in-game leaders is incredibly inconsistent, because at that same point in time as you had Alu and Kiyoshima, the narrative around that team was, oh my god, look at all the skill they have now that they have Alu and Kiyoshima. And so the fact that, so even though
well, I think it was more of adding Nico rather than adding, because Kiyoshima.
No, but they were playing well, and they're like, oh, this is a super team, and things like that. Those are narratives that were going on even before they had got.
I felt like it was more of like the current Mouse Sports sort of narrative. Like, they're a pretty good international team. Like, they actually have a lot of skill here, but it wasn't they should be winning tournaments. They should be the best.
People kept calling them a super team. I know, because I went on a Twitter rant at that time about how they were not a super team. Like Alu and Kiyoshima are not like. I mean,
there was sort of that like super team idea of G2 being a super team, FaZe being a super team. Who else was this? Oh, SK obviously adding the talent of Phelps being so it's sort of like this narrative that all got blended together.
But here's why this is. People were thinking of that team that as, oh, they just received an influx in skill, and so people were giving credit to the players in that team and not the in-game leader. But if you look at the same time at other teams that were having success, Astralis had, I would say uncontestably, but some people would argue that they had as much skill, if not more skill,
than FaZe,
and SK had by far and wide way more skill. And yet in 2017, people were saying Glaive is an amazing in-game leader. People were saying Fallen is an amazing in-game leader, and yet people don't give the same.
Okay, I see what you're saying. That you're saying that FaZe is actually sort of under par in terms of skill, and they're actually competing in terms of raw results. Yeah, actually, in terms of raw results, in line with Astralis and a bit behind SK from that.
Yeah,
start of 2017 or after the E-League. Atlanta major to the player break. Maybe FaZe even overachieved during that period. That's what you're saying?
They definitely overachieved if you compare their firepower to other firepower. Like, they didn't overachieve insofar as they were a very good team, and they, if anything, they slightly underachieved because they only won one tournament. Remember?
Yeah.
And they could never beat SK, so they slightly underachieved considering how good they were. But what I'm saying is that how good they were was not caused, because of how good their firepower was. There's a lot going on there that made that team incredibly good. And also, if you just look at how much that team improved and how much, like, when I mentioned TSM, the point that I'm making is that if you look at the same teams, but when you take someone out of the team and you add Kerrigan, those are significant and immediate improvements. And to me, that suggests strongly that there's, quite clearly some impact that's going on.
Yeah.
When the players say, oh my God, Kerrigan, he's just so good. He's just telling us what to do, and it's great. And like, spank me daddy and whatever.
Yeah, okay.
My point is
spank that me daddy, clearly... you said that.
I don't know, maybe Alu, he's a crazy motherfucker. But my point is that there's a clear causation there going on, where the team is clearly improving. I don't think it's coasting by.
Okay, so there's a couple points there. I sort of started this on the wrong path when I first tweeted at you talking about the firepower phase. But, I mean, there's obviously... I was thinking about this one in terms of Zeus as an in-game leader when I wrote that article on Zeus recently, which everyone should read if they're watching this video as an audience member. You're as an in-game leader, it's not, okay, I have X amount of firepower, what can I do with it? There's obviously other factors, right? What's your... I mean, that's what people don't give enough credit to FaZe with. The difficulty of that is that there's a lot of role overlap, right? And then you had to sort of mold Olafmeister into sort of a very different type of player, more of an anchor CT player, and sort of a less impactful, less prominent T player, more peripheral. But there's see, Straws has great role diversity. That's something that I think people don't think of in terms of Straws because, first of all, Dupree and a Device, obviously, Device was once a great rifler, as we all know, and now he's a great opper. Dupree, we've seen do a whole bunch of different things within the last year. So I think with it, in terms of Straws, first of all, you have great firepower. Then you have great role diversity. Also, and then Zipnix is like the most specifically strong player, like the most like the best role player, like like he fits his role very, very well, and he does it very well as that very supportive sort of player. So I think Astralis' natural structure is really strong, but for a team like current Na'Vi, that might actually be very difficult. Zeus himself trying to slot him into a role, it's actually a very difficult spot because what he's always been done traditionally is sort of been taken up by people like Electronic and Flamey. So I think Zeus actually has a pretty difficult job in the current Na'Vi team, but like it's not. You can put it in the frame of, oh, he has a ton of firepower, so his job is easy. But I think it's actually very difficult to gauge it that way. And it's actually, it always comes down to this sort of hidden thing of, well, we don't know how manageable the players are, what the team environment is. But in terms of Kerrigan, okay, yeah, obviously Fnatic was a very, very good team in 2015. But you got to think in 2016 when Na'Vi falls off, when Fnatic falls off, when he has Kirby, has the lineup that would eventually win the major stance himself for Glaive. I mean, he could have done so much more with that lineup, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at that 2016 lineup, it was probably the biggest failure of everyone on that roster, especially Kerrigan, because he was leading that team. They did actually, I remember being a fan of that team. It was quite depressing.
Yeah.
They weren't like terrible. Like they were more like SK with Phelps at the end of their tenure than like SK with Bolts at the end of their tenure, let's say. But they were not competing very, very well, and they did struggle to fit Kirby into their system.
Well, and the one major they played with that roster was all fucked up because of sickness and visa, right? That Cologne 2016.
Right. Yeah. Well, no, but even like despite they were just not that good a team.
Yeah, I mean, if we were talking about in terms of being due for a major, but yeah, that team was not very good.
Yeah.
Losing to
so that
American
was the
TSM at ECS Season 1 and stuff like that.
Yeah, like that was definitely, and I think Kerrigan himself would tell you that was his worst moment as an in-game leader. I mean, it's done in a vacuum because that team, he had been playing with the core of that team for a year, more than a year at that point in time. And what had, according to, public statements, what ended up happening is that they kind of, disagreed with the way that Kerrigan wanted to play. Kerrigan wanted to play as a way to solve their problems. It seems Kerrigan wanted to play a little more loose and try to, play more off your individuals because they had very strong individual players at the time. And the rest of the team didn't want to do that. So they removed Kerrigan, and I think they were still friends at that time, and whatever, it's fine. But I think Kerrigan definitely lost the faith of his team at that point. But I don't think it's that strange. Like it's definitely not a great thing in your career, but at the same time, given the fact that it was an old roster, it comes with the baggage from the previous lineup, which was very strong. And so I'd give that as a strict minus, but not like proof of being a bad leader. Yeah. In the same way that C's playing with Na'Vi is a pretty good inclination that he wasn't a good leader, at least the leader of men at that point in time. This isn't so damning. And I think if you look at the important thing is, even though you can have minuses, it doesn't take away the success that you had before. Just like the fact that Fallen has had a dog shit roster, or has had a dog shit team with a good roster in the last 6 months, 8 months, it means that he isn't, perfect, certainly, but it also doesn't mean that he did a very good job with LG beforehand, right? So you have to be careful with that.
So we sort of agreed. I think FaZe did sort of. I I actually haven't thought about that. The FaZe were sort of a sub roster and sort of the super team era. That's an interesting thought. I would have to think about that, but no, it seems reasonable. I mean, they didn't like flunk out and look like dog shit at that major that roster attended. But you got to think, okay, with the Olaf and Guardian edition, what do you think about Kerrigan in this period? Because, I mean, okay, you can say SK with Phelps and then going into Bolts was decent teams, but no Astralis, no G2. VP obviously long gone. Mouse Sports still sort of getting there in terms of competency. Navi, there was a period there where they didn't have electronic. Then when they integrated electronic, it was sort of slow to build up, and then it really didn't happen until 2018.
Yeah.
What do you think about that first E-League major? What do you think about this major with FaZe? Do you think that FaZe should have won that first major, E-League Boston? And what do you think about their chances at this current major?
Yeah, well, I think if you're trying to judge which the two times that they should have won, is that last major that he had with TSM as TSM.
Yep.
Was a big one. I forget the name of that tournament, but
Cologne. Cologne 2016.
Not Cologne. It wasn't Cologne 20.
MLG Columbus.
No. It was 2015. It was the last major.
Cluj.
Yeah, Cluj-Napoca. Yeah, that was the best chance that they had.
It's also a sick peer group at that time, though.
Yeah, but they
Fnatic,
lost. They lost to NIP. That's what happened. They lost to NIP in the quarterfinals. They got dumped on by NIP, and NIP wasn't that good at that time. So, so that was that was upsetting. But then that was an opportunity, and then the E-League major was the other big opportunity in Boston. They should have won both, but they should have especially won this one because this one they didn't even have the.
No, they had there was no one around, right? This was like the perfect time.
Yeah,
but like, how much does that? I mean, I had to go back and watch those games. It's sort of escaping my memory at the minute. But how much?
Well,
how much?
Yeah,
okay, how much is that on Kerrigan, right?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So you have to be. So, on one hand, the calling on their Inferno T side, which was the last side they were on.
Versus Cloud9 in the finals.
Yeah. Was bad. Whoever's fault that was, we have to assume that it was Kerrigan because he's the caller. Obviously,
that's just
many people call it
sort of normal assumption you have to make.
Yeah, so that's the assumption we're making. That was bad. So that you can definitely say that they choked or he choked at that point, which is obviously coherent with what's happened to FaZe before and after. And TSM. So if you want to say that Kerrigan chokes, I mean, I checked before. I think he's won 11 titles and he has 12 second places. So I don't think his finals thing is that bad. But with FaZe, it has been bad. So they've lost a lot of finals, and that's definitely at some level that falls on him because they were the best team in many of those finals, including the ones versus SK at some points in time. So. Yeah, but at the same time, you have to be careful because they did finish that regulation 15-15. So it's not like they went, they got no rounds in that match and they completely bombed the final. In reference, would you say that those, let's say, Device or Glaive or Dupree were not worthy of the major if they hadn't made the comeback, or they hadn't quite gotten over the finish line when they in that comeback versus VP in that final in the previous E-League major?
My sort of framing of like deserving is like if you think about not the team per se, like think of Device as a player. Like if it was sort of just like a fantasy draft where you could draft any player, and you just assembled the best teams, you'd assume at some point in time. It's just like all international rosters. It's all just about who's the best. There's not like the weird friendship things. There's not the language barriers, buyouts, and that sort of thing. It's really just like assembling the best rosters. You think at some point in time he would have been on one of the best rosters and would have won one of the biggest tournaments in the world, the World Championship in this fictional universe, right? Would Kerrigan Like, okay,
Well,
I mean, like, okay, no, okay, Zipnik's also great support player. Does Zipnik's deserve a major? Okay, that's more tricky. Dupree, I think, is one of the almost, like, I think he's the most underrated player currently in Counter-Strike. I think Dupree is a very good player. I don't think he gets enough credit for how good he is, how much he brings to Astralis. But you can say that about all the Astralis players. Kind of, that's such a good team.
Literally every single one except for Glaive.
Yeah.
Glaive's the only one who gets a proper amount of credit.
Maybe I'd have to think about it if I was actually going to write an article with the title being like, Dupree is the most underrated player in Counter-Strike. But, what was it? Yeah, no, I think Dupree maybe deserve. Dupree, I think, is that I'd have to think now. I sort of to go a different state of mind. Like, how good is a player Dupree? How long has he been a good player? I think there's other in-game leaders who are proven much more capable than Kerrigan. Like,
I don't think there are.
I think Glaive is proven with Astralis that he's like, well, maybe with that specific lineup is proven more effective.
So you have to be careful.
Yeah.
It's quite probable that Glaive is a better in-game leader, but you've also seen him across fewer rosters. So you have to be careful.
So you don't know how he interact with a completely different team. Maybe with this specific group of players, he's very effective, but with a different group, he's actually very ineffective. Well, that's actually an interesting thing about Kerrigan. He's played with two very different teams with FaZe and Astralis, right?
Yeah. And he's also played with two different cores on FaZe, I'd argue, because there's only two players that are the same on that one, and one of them is actually he's played with three different rosters, and the only one that's still there is Rain, and Rain has like no personality, so I'm not sure. Like Nico's obviously the emblematic person on that team, and he's been there for two of them, but it's not the same as the Zip Dupree and Device trio. It's a little, but he's played with a variety of different teams. Yeah. Okay. So he's a little more proven. But I would say it's quite probable that Glaive is a better in-game leader overall than Kerrigan, and it's also quite probable that Fallen is a better in-game leader than Kerrigan. But both have the issue that they haven't proven it with various cores. But also, in another sense, that's okay. Like, in order for someone to be like considered like a Mount Rushmore player or an excellent Hall of Fame player, it doesn't need to be the best at his position ever. He just needs to be one of the best in his position ever. And I think that those are probably the only two in-game leaders that can, that are up to snuff. Maybe Zeus.
I think Zeus is. Zeus, when I did the articles, that he's not like the sickest in-game leader ever. I think he gets a team to work. I think that's his strength, that he can get very different lineups. The old Na'Vi, then Gambit, then the current Na'Vi to work. They at least work and they're good. They actually got to a pretty good level. He helped boost the level of all those teams. Maybe when he was on an in-game leader at the end of his first run of Na'Vi, he wasn't obviously helping as he's just a player. But
there's an
interesting thing when you think about the coin flip analogy. Like, okay, if there's a 10% chance of winning each major, if you're like one of the top 5 in-game leaders of the world, and you played 10 majors, and say as long as you're just on one of these best teams as the in-game leader, you have like over 10 runs, and you have a 10% chance you should like eventually win one, right? Well, sooner or later, just luck will happen in your favor. But I don't know if that's like he's so sick that he's like deserved the win yet. See, that's my trepidation. Like, I think when you talk about a superstar player like Guardian, he's boosting this team so much. Where I'm not sure Guardian. Okay, I sort of meant to go back to this point. Sort of this classic narrative with Kerrigan with the initial boost, like going back to FaZe when he first joined, he boosted them a lot, and going from Dignitas when he joined after Fetch left. He gave this great initial boost, but there's sort of this Peyton Manning sort of a storyline where it's like, does he have it in it to make the championship team, to be the champion?
Yeah, but okay, well, so this is where my terminology of the do kind of differs, because I don't think so. Like in one of the tweets, I specified that it's more about being worthy of what the major represents than the major specifically. Obviously, in almost every situation, if you're worthy of the major, then you'll win the major. Like, if you're the best team, you'll win, right? Like, in most situations, like maybe the FaZe Cloud9 one the expected value and value. I'd have to rewatch it, but in most situations, like for example, it's not like Astralis was due to win Krakow, or in the sense that you're thinking. They didn't deserve to win Krakow because they lost to Gambit, and they lost fair and square, and they were the worst team in the best of 3. That's fine. But in terms of,
I mean, if they played that major 10 times, they would have been due to win Krakow, though.
No, I don't think so.
Oh wait. Wait. Okay. No. Krakow. Okay. No, SK. Okay.
That's when they lost against. No.
Well, so I guess it's the amount of iterations. Right. If they don't, I think
if you because if you repeat the situation with the same circumstances over and over again, you'll get the same result, except for the elements that are random. And the elements that are random in this case is the difference between expected value and value. So how good the plays you made were and how well they turned out is a different thing, right? But I don't think that, like, so for example, if you're 15-15 and you made a play that was good and that should have worked, but you got unlucky with the timing or something like that, you lost the round and therefore you lost the game. That's bad luck. If you play that over and over again, you'll probably get it right and you'd probably win with slightly different timings or something like that. But like Gambit was just the better team in that best of 3, and so it isn't clear to me.
Oh, dude, say, what about Mo with that overpass game?
Yeah, but
the fuck out of here. There's no way Gambit wins that overpass game. 7 or more, 5 times out of 10.
But what's important is that he did play that good. Like, considering how much he was, the plays he was making and the form he was on, the expected values of all of his plays were high, and so he played well. So you can't say that was lucky, right? It was lucky that he played that well on the day. But given the fact that he played that well on the day, if you repeat that circumstance with him playing that well on the day and all that.
I mean, that's sort of a weird stipulation that you...
No, it makes sense if you understand the difference between expected value and value in the way that I mean it, and you don't know that because I haven't released the article yet, but I will.
Okay. No, I mean...
but what
expected
I mean is
value
that,
in terms of, like, him as a player versus expected value of him as a player on that day is sort of...
Yeah, but in that server, right? So... like in that server.
Okay, I guess what you're saying.
The expected values of his day. So, because if you say, "Oh, let's repeat the best of 3," you mean on the same day?
No, I don't mean on the same day. I mean like different days, different weeks, different.
Obviously,
yeah.
Then sure, yeah, of course, but yeah, obviously. But what I mean is that like it's true that Kerrigan wouldn't, if you rerun those majors and all that, maybe he wins this one, but it wouldn't even be that sick if he had won it with FaZe at that tournament. If he had won in Boston, it would have been fine, but it wouldn't have been amazing. What I mean when I say what I mean when I say he's due is I mean that the major represents something. It has a certain status attached to it, just like in any sport, like in the Stanley Cup. People look at great players, Hall of Fame players like Ginla or Alfredson, and they say, which I know you don't know, but like it doesn't matter. Let's say someone like Peyton Manning, right? Yeah. Or someone excellent. But I know Peyton Manning. I think he won a Super Bowl, right? But
I think so. At the end of his career,
like,
Broncos.
Yeah. But let's say someone who never did, and you're like, oh, he was an amazing player, but he never quite won, did he?
Yeah.
Something like that. But the point is that I think that Kerrigan is worthy of that in the same way that. If you look at the major winners, there are players who are major winners who aren't worthy of a major in this sense. In the
don't talk shit about Stu 2K, please.
I mean more like Mo.
Oh yeah.
But Zeus, like if you look at Zeus, if he hadn't won a major, you'd be like, what? Or Guardian, you look at him, or Device, or Simple at the end of his career, or Nico at the end of his career, if he never wins, and you're like, how? If the major means anything, surely we can give it to him. Whatever that means, we can give it to him. The major's supposed to mean the best of the best. We know you were the best, and we can give you that praise without having won the title. You're a Hall of Fame worthy player, and we're not going to put any stipulation next to you saying, well, you're not quite as great as the other one, or because you never.
I mean, if you think about it like this way: if there's 10 majors, right? Like, is he in that 10% bracket of having a chance to win the major throughout history? At least in a few of those, his team. That's my problem.
No, but I think so. If you look at the best in-game leaders of all time, like if you want to make it this way, this is a weird way to put it, but if you want to say there's been 10 majors who are the top 10 in-game leaders of all time, or if you want to divide those majors across all the in-game leaders, right? So you can say, okay, Fallen deserved 3 or whatever.
Yeah.
Like Kerrigan is one of the best in-game leaders of all time, and he deserves that status, and he doesn't get that status, which is why.
How many majors? Okay, we run this experiment, 10 majors, right? You said that Kerrigan is overdue or way overdue for a major. How many majors should Kerrigan have won at this point in his career?
He should have won 2. He should have won 2.
Yeah, you sort of said this earlier. The TSM one and the phase one.
But even ignoring circumstances, like if you look at how good his teams were and how good he was, and at some points in time he was quite a good player. Like he was at points in time. One of the
TM time he wasn't that bad, right?
Yeah, I mean, I still think he's a good player. Like he's obviously not as good. He's not as good as anyone else on his team. Like, right. But he's still a pretty good player, and he's
no MSL. That's what you're trying to say.
No, he's not. But I mean, like, Glaive is obviously pretty good. Like, he's a pretty good player, and he could probably be on a roster even if he wasn't the in-game leader. Kerrigan probably couldn't be on a roster if he wasn't an in-game leader, on a top 10 roster, say, but he'd still be a good player. Like, and he has this. Actually, what's funny about him losing all his finals is that he's a really clutch player. Maybe not so much a clutch caller, though. But the point is, like, if you want to divvy it up, like, it's hard to say, but there's some players that have won more majors than they're worth. And there's people, if you think of it, if you associate with status, I'm not saying they didn't deserve to win. If you associate with status, like Pronax, I think, has won 2 or 3 majors.
I
can look it up.
Exist.
Well, Exist has only won 1. So, yeah, to be fair, and actually, like, imagine if Nip hadn't won that. Think about how Do fucking Get Right and Forrest would be.
That makes sense to me. But like when you get to in-game leaders and support players, I think at some level that's more interchangeable. Because I think, I mean, there's only so many in-game leaders that you think of as that level, but like. You said this to me on an episode of the show that you think like, oh, if you put Snappy into MSL's career or into MSL's teams, he would have the same level of success. Now, that was before the whole optic fiasco. Yeah. Or you even jokingly said
I mean, I don't know if I literally said that. That's so weird. Or Hunden, maybe. Yeah. I mean, maybe. That's possible.
You didn't say the career part, but you said if you'd replace MSL with Snappy.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I don't even know if that's wrong now, but, like, I think if you put Hunden in North, I don't know if they would be much worse than they are now, because Hunden's pretty sick.
But okay, think about it this way. If you gave MSL Kerrigan's career, like, how does that change your expectations per the major? Okay, I know MSL's a joke right now, like, because it's such a big thing on our show, and
no, it's
usually but that's sort of a weird thing to think about, right?
No. So is MSL one of those guys? Is he one of those worthy of a major guys?
But like, there's a difference between these guys who've been at the top of the scene for a long time and have this sort of status, and there's actual just like. It's hard to rate people's ability. Like Sean Gares, there's no point of his career where you said that his team should have won a major. Yeah, you think I'm sure that you think he's a very capable in-game leader. He did some interesting things back in the day, and he still seems like a very intelligent guy on this work and in videos and stuff like that. But like, see, that's right. Yeah. Like, he doesn't really have that status as like Zeus, Kerrigan, Glaive, Fallen.
No, right? He doesn't. But my point, and maybe he should.
And then there's someone like Existence, who also maybe doesn't have the same status, but maybe has a greater or equal capacity. And it's hard to tell because it's never really had the same level of lineups from a certain point on.
Yeah, I mean, at some point in time with Existence, like you kind of earn your laurels, like whether or not. So, for example, like Kerrigan deserved or earned his kick when he got kicked from Astralis. Like, he should have been kicked at that point. And I remember as a fan, I was asking for him to get kicked, for sure. And so I think that's fine. I just look at Kerrigan's career and I put it next to other in-game leaders that people love, like Glaive and Fallen, which are probably at this point in time the two most celebrate in-game leaders.
And you assume that he should have won a major by
well,
now. That's sort of what you mean.
No, but I see inconsistencies in how people give him credit.
Okay.
So I see people give credit to Fallen for what he did with LG and what he did with the SK and SK with Phelps and all that shit. And when Phelps starts working with, when that Phelps lineup starts winning lands, people are like, God damn, man, Fallen's so good at making these players work together.
I mean, you make the same argument about Nico and Kerrigan.
That's what I mean. Like when people talk about FaZe, you're like, oh well, Kerrigan, like, and people do say this. I know you don't think this, but like people will legitimately say like, oh, you would put any fucking in-game leader in here, and it would, obviously you put any in-game leader in there, it will probably work to some extent.
It's hard to assess how difficult it is to lead that roster because people don't give Kerrigan enough credit in this sense. He's got his nationalities are fucked, right? Like he has like a bunch of different fucking players. Like who's Fallen working with? Okay, now it's actually more difficult, but he's not succeeding with the more difficult mixed nationality roster. Then you have Glaive, who's all Danish players, right? Zeus, okay, maybe that's more tricky with the Kazakhstan and Russia and whatever else, right? But I think they're still speaking a common language. Okay, actually, when you think about it, actually integrating a Guardian might actually have been, but he's sort of a quiet guy. How hard is that? How independent is he? How much are they working off of him? I think Zeus gets a little bit, like I was saying earlier, Zeus gets a little more credit for the difficulty of the rosters he's had to bridge.
But also, how hard is it to get Exist or Olaf Meister to buy into your team when they famously disrespected you when you were their peer and the best teams in the world, right? Like those Swedish guys did not respect TSM.
Oh yeah, that whole storyline with the pause and that's the thing.
Yeah, but it's just like they didn't think that they were as good, or didn't think they had it in them to win. And to some extent, they were right because Fnatic was a better team overall. But you do need some sort of it's clear that that as an in-game leader, Kerrigan's got chops because he's been able to get people that were directionless or weren't working and get them over the stepping line. For example, Nico just couldn't make playoffs, or Astralis the Copenhagen Wolves and Dignitas. Dignitas could just not win semifinals, and then they won 5 or 6 big titles under Kerrigan's tenure, and they were an excellent team when they were TSM and Question Mark and Astralis right at the beginning, and then they became trash. So I mean, and then he had 3 FaZe rosters in the first FaZe roster. I think we only saw a LAN of them or 2 LANs of them, but they were already pretty good.
Yeah, I think people underrate that roster for Nico. They made 2 straight top 4s, Elite Season 2 and ECS Season 2.
And then he had a pretty good roster with Alu and Kyo, and he was excellent there, and that was one of the best teams in the world. Maybe should have been the best team in the world at that point in time.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe that's controversial, but and then the other thing with Guardian and Nico and all, that's a hard one. I think
that too is hard. Okay, I mean I just sort of interloped on our fight on Twitter, and he was like, "Dude, FaZe's T sides are shit. How can you give credit?" I
don't get why he said that. I haven't paid attention to FaZe's T sides in a long time.
Sometimes you famously that NIP game on Cash on the finals. What tournament was that? Was that Oakland?
I think
Oakland 2017.
2017, yeah.
That was really shitty. But sometimes
if you look at
FaZe
the win rates overall, like recently they have an over 50% win rate on T sides in the top 3 maps. I'm not saying they have great T sides. I don't know. I haven't watched them, but it seems strange to say they're terrible. It's also been underrated how tactical they are. They're not super tactical, but they're not fucking envious or LVLC. They still use tactics.
Yeah.
It's not just random, and they're pretty well.
Speaking of random, have you been watching Vega? Dude, that shit's so weird.
No,
you can't wrap your mind around it.
I haven't watched.
Just straight dry peeking everywhere. But okay, I think we sort of covered this. You good? Are you mad at me? We're good.
No, it's fine. No, it's fine.
All right. Twitter fight over. Not Writer's Block. Episode 1 also over.